everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. Well, if you want to understand the mentality of these people, listen to what Donald Trump said today at the White House when asked the question, if Biden wins, would there be a peaceful transfer of power? Listen.
Win, lose, or draw in this election, will you commit here today for a peaceful transfer of power after the election? And there has been rioting in Louisville. There's been rioting in many cities across this country, red and your so-called red and blue states. Will you commit to making sure that there is a peaceful transfer of power after the election?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster.
I understand that, but people are rioting. Do you commit to making sure that there's a peaceful transfer of power?
We want to get rid of the ballots, and we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation. The ballots are out of control. You know it. And you know who knows it better than anybody else? The Democrats know it better than anybody else. Go ahead.
What you're dealing with is, again, you're dealing with a thug here.
Back to our Road Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment.
As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding for services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please, take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. Again, you're dealing with a thug here. The folks at The Atlantic dropped a story today that laid out exactly what it is that Republicans are trying to do. What they're doing right now is they are working. The Trump campaign is working with lawyers in the various states where they want to challenge. They're planting the seeds. This is the headline in The Atlantic: the election that could break America. And what they're trying to do in this story here, okay, and this is what the lead says: there is a cohort of close observers of our presidential election, scholars and lawyers and political strategists, who find themselves in the uneasy position of intelligence analysts in the months before 9/11. And it goes on and on and on. What it lays out in this article is that what Republicans are trying to do is that if it is close in states, what they will then do is say, forget this, forget the counting, it's going on too long. We're going to declare that we know what the will of the voters are and choose the electors ourselves. Now, let me take you back to 2000. Folks, you have to remember, in Florida actually exposed for people the first time an understanding of the Constitution. First, there is no affirmative right to vote in the United States Constitution. When you hear people say voting is a right, that's simply not true. There is nothing in the Constitution that affirms that every voter has a right to vote. Because of amendments, it does say you cannot prevent folks from voting because of race or gender. So what people didn't realize was that when looking at the laws, the way this country was set up, I keep telling y'all beforehand, this is why civics is important. The country was set up for white men who own land to control the nation. So state legislatures actually have the power to choose electors. The Electoral College was a slavery compromise. And so they wanted to be able to control who became president. So what Donald Trump is doing is they are trying to work with Republican legislatures to say that if it's close in several states, that these legislatures will simply say enough is enough, and we are going to choose the electors from the state, and we are going to discern what the voters actually wanted to happen. That's what is going on. This arena is what people really need to be paying attention to, because Donald Trump has no problem, and the Republican Party has no problem with thrusting America into a constitutional crisis, because it is their desire to hold on to power regardless of what happens.
You know, I've got a slight smile on my face because I know what's really at play here, right? And it's they want that crisis so they can litigate their way out of it. They can use these courts through which Donald Trump has got his people in. Okay, look, there's so many examples. Just look at the past 4 years, but particularly look at the past 4 months. There's so many good cases that tell us that these are Donald Trump's judges. It was always about the judges' role. And this is always what it's been about in electing this, two-time philandering fool. He's a fraudster. He's, a schmuck who basically has gotten so good at conning folks. And this is how he's doing it. He's using the courts to get his way. So yes, Republicans want that constitutional crisis. They thump the Constitution, but they do what they wish will. They would do what they will with it. And their wish essentially is to disenfranchise voters who look like us. They do not want us to have what they have. This is about a tale of two Americas. I've said it over and over again these past few years. There is not one America in which we are equal to white people. And this is extremely difficult for me to say as a conservative coming up in this career. And I've always held myself at the same standard, but what I've seen in what Donald Trump has done in using our judiciary for his gains, I have seen very clearly that many a conservative is okay with that if it means that they go untouched, if their lives are unimpacted. So therefore, if the lives of others are impacted, okay. That's a casualty. But we will litigate this the way we want so that we will get the justices that we want. That's what it's always been about. I realize that sounds like a very elementary argument. I'm making an overly simplistic, perhaps, analysis of the situation. But it's very, very important that we talk to our friends and family who may even think that he is not the threat to the Constitution that he is. It's very, very important that we speak to them in simple terms about it. This is a constitutional crisis that they are welcoming.
Scott, I'm read this here. This is from the Atlantic piece. The worst case, however, is not that Trump rejects the election outcome. The worst case is that he uses his power to prevent a decisive outcome against him. If Trump sheds all restraint, and if his Republican allies play the part he assigns them, he could obstruct the emergence of a legally unambiguous victory for Biden in the Electoral College and then in Congress. He could prevent the formation of consensus about whether there is any outcome at all. He could seize on that uncertainty to hold on to power. Trump's state and national legal teams are already laying the groundwork for post-election maneuvers that would circumvent the results of the vote count in battleground states. Ambiguities in the Constitution and logic bombs in the Electoral Count Act make it possible to extend the dispute all the way to Inauguration Day, which would bring the nation to a precipice. The 20th Amendment is crystal clear. The president's term in office shall end at noon on January 20th, but the two men could show up to be sworn in. One of them would arrive with all the tools and power of the presidency already in hand. This is why, Scott, I have made it clear to people that the vote in states cannot be close. There has to be no doubt. If Joe Biden beats Donald Trump by 2, 3, or 400,000 votes in Florida or North Carolina and Georgia, then you're not going to have these games because it will be no doubt. That is how you beat this thug and his Republican imps at their own game.
Yeah, we got to do it. As you were reading that piece in Atlantic, I was thinking, so where's the military going to be on this? Because we're going to be in crisis and like a third world junta. Let's just see where the military is going to be on this. I tell you what else this begs, though, as a question, is the importance of the Senate races. Because if the Senate turns to Democrat and the House stays Democratic, then if he pulls any of these maneuvers with the electors at the state level, that will be challenged in state court and all the way to the Supreme Court. But it's got to be done by January 1st. And depending on if the electors are selected by the state legislature, they're right. That would be a lot quicker, but it would be under legal challenge. But if the Senate and the House both have run by the Dems, then there's more maneuvering after January 1st that both houses could do to either impeach him or remove him. But we've never had an unpeaceful transfer of power. If we get to January 1st at noon and there's no declared winner, what do we do? You're right, two could show up, but that's just borders on the nonsensical. That makes no sense. And so the Democrats have to be as prepared as the Republicans are in laying this groundwork. But I agree, we're going to be in constitutional crisis, and I have no doubt that Trump, if it's close, he's not leaving. Or we're going to have to throw him out or impeach him again.
What we are seeing, Robert, we're seeing again Trump and the Republicans try to use all these tactics. They are suing folks in Pennsylvania, suing folks in Georgia. And what they hope is they hope these federal judges agree with them. And what their game plan is to appeal every decision up to the Supreme Court. That's why they want to seat this justice so bad, because they want a 6-3 majority. And if John Roberts chooses to go the way of the liberal justices, then they still have a 5-4 win. That is their strategy, Robert Patillo.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I remember being in law school and being outside picketing the Supreme Court during one of my summer internships when John Roberts was up for confirmation, because we thought he would be the most far right-wing justice on the court at the time, and here he is now the swing justice on the court. It's not because he got any more liberal during the time he's been on the court. It's because the court has gone so far to the far right that now what we used to think was a radical conservative on the court is now the moderate swing voice on the court. And let's also remember, it was just a couple months ago that the Supreme Court ruled that the electors have to go along with what the state says. That you cannot have rogue electors. You cannot go against what the state has voted for, what the state has decided for you. So we're no longer, they've stripped the electors themselves of having the power to step away from what's been said and to vote their own hearts and vote their own conscience, vote their own minds. So yes, we are set up for a constitutional crisis. We're going to have back-to-back constitutional crises. One on the replacement of Justice Ginsburg on the court, which is going to be a constitutional crisis, and we're not quite certain how that battle is going to go. And then secondarily, if the election is even within sniffing distance, because last time Hillary won by 3 million votes, and there was still consternation. And we're not going to see a situation where Republicans do the honorable thing like Al Gore did and just concede, or do the honorable thing like John Kerry did and not have a recount recount in Ohio because it was what was in the best interest of the nation. These people are going to fight and claw because what they're fighting for is something very different than what Democrats are fighting for. Democrats want health care. We want a clean environment. We want education for our children. We want a foreign policy that is humble. We want the regular things in politics. Listen to what they were talking about at the Republican convention. Listen to Matt Gaetz. Listen to Charlie Kirk. They're talking about a fight in defense of Western civilization, that the last man standing between the mob, between the hordes, between the immigrants, between America being overrun by minorities is Donald Trump. This is the American carnage that Donald Trump talked about in his inaugural address. So we can't pretend that we're fighting the same fight and that we're fighting by the same rules. Democrats are still playing by the traditional rules of politics. The Republicans right now are fighting the battles of the Holy Roman Empire. They're fighting against the mongrel hordes and the Umayyad Caliphate. They think that they are in an existential crisis for the future of whiteness in this country, and it will be a white majority nation going forward. And because of that, they are willing to use every tool in the basket, and don't expect them to just lie down and do the right thing.
All right, folks, back to our Roadblock Unfiltered video in just one moment.
As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding or services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. Folks, 42 days until Election Day, but the reality is we've already started voting. Early voting has also been taking place in various states as well. Ballots have gone out 2 weeks ago in North Carolina. We want you to please go to vote.org. I cannot implore you enough. I've had multiple people send me text messages and emails as well stating that they thought they were registered until they checked, and now they realize that they have been purged. And so please go to vote.org to check that first. If you have not registered, the deadlines are coming up. You must get registered, folks. This is huge. I'm telling you, you do not want to be waiting. Here are the deadlines. 28 days before November 3rd, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, New Mexico, Ohio, Rhode Island, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas. 20 to 27 days before the election. Delaware, Kansas, Massachusetts, Missouri, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Oregon, Virginia, West Virginia. 15 days before the election, Alabama, Nebraska, Pennsylvania, South Dakota. Folks, that is going, look, we can sit here and talk all day. We can sit here and say, well, hopefully Murkowski, hopefully Romney, hopefully Susan Collins will do the right thing. When you put your trust in them, you got problems. Let's go to my panel. Gary Chambers Jr., publisher of the Rouge Collection, Dr. Avis Jones DeWeaver, political analyst, Mustafa Santiago Ali, PhD and former senior advisor for environmental justice with the EPA. This, Avis, and again, I have been ringing the alarm and yelling and screaming and been doing this since the moment Trump got elected. All of these damn people out here who was saying that bullshit in 2016, leave the top of the ticket open. Hey, Trump and Hillary, they're the same. They're no different. Guess what? I said it then. I don't care what you had to say about Hillary Clinton and super predators and her emails. She was not going to appoint the same type of judges as Donald Trump. And now we know, Bill Clinton has already said it, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was hoping Hillary was going to win and she can get replaced by Hillary Rodham Clinton. That didn't happen. Trump won. Some Obama folks were trying to get her to retire in 2015, saying, hey, don't chance it. She chose not to. Now we're at this juncture here, and look, it comes down to, look, the only way you can really impact Collins, Murkowski, and Romney's if you got a massive blowout in November where they say, hey, this is going to be grossly unfair to the American people for us to do this in a lame duck session. Otherwise, McConnell's going to push this through, and they're going to have a 6-3 advantage on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, this is the doomsday scenario that we're facing right now. And I completely agree with you. I am still furious. Call me petty, but I'm just going to have to be petty, okay? I am still furious with people who oftentimes, people who have huge platforms. The lack of responsibility that they showed in 2016 is absolutely astounding. And the only thing that's worse than the lack of responsibility they showed by spreading misinformation and potentially influencing God knows how many people to not take advantage of the right that their forefathers fought and died for, and ultimately find ourselves at the place that we're here now, on the verge of losing the Supreme Court for a good 40 years, on top of Black people being twice as likely to die of coronavirus than white folks, and on and on and on and on. The only thing that makes me even more mad than that is the cowardice that we're seeing now by those same people for not even being able to admit that they were wrong, and then to encourage other people today to not make the same mistakes that they made in 2016. You know, none of us are perfect. All of us make mistakes, but adults can admit to their mistakes. And then they learn from their mistakes. And then they share what they've learned with other people so that we don't make the same mistake over again. But by sitting here in 2020 and acting like 2016 never happened, acting like they never said what they said, and allowing other people and not saying anything when we have a new cohort of ridiculousness in this era, telling people basically to do the same thing that they told people to do in 2016, and then not to say anything about that is unforgivable. We need to understand what's on the ballot right now, what's at stake right now. We are facing a situation where it's not only going to impact our lives, this is going to impact our grandchildren's lives. This is not an easy fix. And so what we need to do now is everything humanly possible to make sure that it stops. I don't care what it is. It's everything. It's being in the streets. It's calling your senator. It's voting at massive levels so that there is no room for equivocation in November. A humiliating defeat is what we have to deliver at the polls. And that requires that we don't fall for the same foolishness that far too many fell for in 2016.
I'm real clear, Gary, in terms of making demands of any candidate. I'm real clear in terms of laying out an agenda. But I'm also very clear on opening my damn eyes and surveying the field. It's sort of like if I played football and I'm sitting here as a middle linebacker and all I'm doing is looking at the quarterback. I ain't paying attention to nobody else. I might get my behind beat because I'm not surveying the entire field. The reality is this here, and this goes for ADOS, FBA, Bernie Bros, every group you can imagine. I don't care who they are. This is real simple. If you actually say you want reparations, you ain't getting it with a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court. You ain't getting it with 300 conservative federal judges. You're not getting it. You're not getting environmental protection. You're not getting voting rights. I mean, we can go down the line of all the stuff that your ass not gonna get if they can, if the Republicans stay in control of the United States Senate. Period.
Well, that's all of that's facts, Roland. And you know, elections have consequences. And I think that it was short-sighted and foolish of anybody to, one, not vote in 2016, and to believe that Republicans, for whatever reason, will not get out and support their candidate. You know, I concur with the sister. I think it's foolish. And as somebody that's 35, right, in that age demographic where my generation is not as active in voting, you know, many of them don't want to hear, you know, the age-old things about who sacrificed. But the real deal is you are screwing yourself by not voting, right? Because when you talk about all that's at stake, when you talk about the future of education for your children, when you talk about the future of healthcare in your community, when you talk about your ability to vote, right, if you so choose to, when you become a property owner, start paying some taxes on some property, right? And then your concerns are on the ballot, I think people will then take this more seriously. But when you look at what happens, the courts are where major decisions are made. And it's also, it can be weaponized against us, right? The courts can be weaponized against us at any point. And conservative justices who believe that the Black Lives Matter movement is Marxist and all of these different things like that, they will take that ideology to the bench and they will use it against us. And so for those of you who want to be able to peacefully, freely protest when the government has done something against your will, for those of you who want to marry whomever you love, for those of you who want to be able to have civil rights protections, to live where you want to live without being discriminated against, this is where it happens at. It happens at the bench. And so if there was anything for us to be concerned about as young Black people, it is how do we stabilize this thing by showing up? And leaving this to the older generation is how we got here. If you're not satisfied with the nominees at hand, the primary process is where we do that part, okay? We have gone past that, we lick our wounds and we move on. The bigger question for me is, are we gonna be mad at ourselves because we didn't go vote right now, or are we going to strategize and do the work over the next 4 years to ensure that we have a candidate of our choosing? It's not about, like you said, Roland, this is the long game. And so if we're going to play the long game, we got to be dedicated, we got to be organized, and we got to strategize for the long game. And you don't just pick your toys up and go home because you didn't win in the primary. We got work to do.
Mustafa, I had a young brother text me over the weekend, tweet me over the weekend. He said, see, y'all older folks, y'all the reason why this happened. I said, bro, let me be real clear with you. I said, I'm 51. I'll be 52 in November. I said, you're in your 20s. I said the likelihood of me hitting 90 is rare. Not many people hit 90. Let's just be real clear. I said, your ass gonna be 60. I said, so you might want to invest in this thing to see. I said, it sounds dumb for, and I'm sorry, it sounds dumb for anybody 18 to 35 to say, well, y'all need to pick better people for me. No, your ass need to be picking people for you. Everybody got a role in this. And so for all these folks, Mustafa, who you talk to, who care about the environment, I'm like, yo, you better understand what's here. Donald Trump has put in significant anti-environmental people who don't care about drilling in offshore. They don't care about drilling in natural parks. These folks want to rape the earth in order to make another buck.
Yeah, without a doubt. You know, what we are talking about is the infrastructure in our communities. We're talking about the infrastructure in our country as well. And when you don't get engaged in this process, you're just giving away the opportunity for you to actually make real change. I don't because I work with all kinds of young people across the country. I don't let folks get away with talking about, well, older folks made the decision or older folks need to make the decisions. I'm like, if you don't see somebody who represents what you believe in, my first question to you is, why didn't you run? Why didn't you get your friends together and identify somebody who you have trust in to run? So I just don't allow that conversation because it's a cop-out that we use whenever we don't want to actually get up off of our butts and actually get engaged in the process and have to do more than something that lasts for an hour or a couple of hours. Folks need to understand, as folks have shared, that you are literally playing with your life and the life of folks in your community. Whoever it is you care about your community, find someone that you care about in your family or your community. It could be your grandma, it could be your auntie, it could be your niece. All of those folks are counting on not only you voting, but understanding the power that exists inside of that vote up and down the ticket in all kinds of different positions. We're talking about the Supreme Court, but we also understand, and we've talked numerous times on this show, if you're tired of the police doing some of the things that you've seen, if you're tired of district attorneys not doing the right thing, get engaged in the process, because your vote can actually help to change what's going on in that situation. If you're not willing to do that, then you just have to be quiet, take the ass whippings that you're going to get from the police and other folks, and excuse my language for being as real as I know how to be, because your vote can really help to change these dynamics. And we keep allowing people to pimp us by not allowing, ourselves to get engaged in the conversation and think that what we do doesn't matter. It matters when we do it in numbers. It matters when we do it through an intelligent set of actions.
All right, folks, back to our Roadmark Unfiltered video in just one moment.
As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding for services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please, take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. Folks, Senator Chuck Schumer and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez held a joint news conference yesterday. They stood in front of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's high school alma mater, fighting to honor her last wish. Here's what they had to say.
We are here because of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing. We are here really for three reasons. To show how unified we are, the Democrats are, in trying to make sure that her legacy is protected. And that's the second reason, to honor that legacy. She was an amazing woman, incredible. In a male-dominated legal establishment, she pushed her way through for brains and strength and fortitude and changed the world for women long before the rest of the world caught up. And when she got to the court, she was able to bring that same equality and strength to so many different people of all different types and kinds. And she was an amazing woman. And so the first reason we're here is for unity, and the second is to honor her legacy, to demand that her last wish be fulfilled by the Senate. She said, "My most fervent wish is that I will not be replaced until a new president is installed." We believe that. So do the American people. Today, a Reuters poll came out and said 62% of Americans agree with her. So that means that's such a high number, it has to mean that Democrats, Republicans, and Independents all agree that it is only right and it is only fair for us to abide by RBG's last wish, that she be replaced when a new president is installed.
We are here today to make sure that we honor the legacy of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who came right here and is a product of James Madison High School and is a proud New Yorker and Brooklynite. And it's extraordinarily important that we understand the stakes of this vacancy. Our reproductive rights are on the line. Our labor rights are on the line. Our right to health care is on the line. Labor and union protections are on the line. Our climate is on the line. With an early appointment, all of our rights, the rights that so many people died for, voting rights, reproductive rights, health care rights, all of those rights are at risk with this appointment. And so we need to make sure that we mobilize on an unprecedented scale to ensure that this vacancy is reserved for the next president. And we must use every tool at our disposal, from everyday people, especially in swing states. We need everyday people to call on senators, to call on folks on the bubble, to call Republican senators to make sure that they hold this vacancy open. And we must also commit to using every procedural tool available to us to ensure that we buy ourselves the time necessary. We must commit to allowing and to considering and to utilizing every single procedural tool available to us, again, to buy that time.
All right, folks, back to our Roadmark Unfiltered video in just one moment.
As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding for services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. The death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on Friday night has opened a massive political fight that will determine the future of this country for the next 40 years. She, of course, died on Friday at the age of 87 from pancreatic cancer. This vacancy, folks, less than 50 days before the election, gives Donald Trump the opportunity to install the third member of the Supreme Court since he has been in the White House. Joe Biden gave a compelling speech yesterday that reflected on the life and legacy of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. He also put emphasis on what's at stake now that she has died.
The nation lost a heroine, an icon. They also lost a mother, a grandmother, and a matriarch. It was my great honor when I was in the Senate and chairman of the Judiciary Committee to preside over her confirmation hearings and strongly support her accession to the Supreme Court bench. Justice Ginsburg achieved a standing few justices have or ever will. She became a presence in the lives of so many Americans and a part of our culture. I agree with what others have said, that she did as much to advance the constitutional rights, opportunities, and justice for women as Justice Marshall did for African Americans. Her granddaughter said yesterday, and said publicly, that her dying words were, quote, "My most fervent wish is that I not be replaced until a new president is installed." As a nation, we should heed her final call to us, not as a personal service to her, but as a service to the country, our country, at a crossroads. There's so much at stake. The right to health care, clean air, clean water, the environment, equal pay for equal work, the rights of voters, immigrants, women, workers. And right now, our country faces a choice about whether we will come back from the brink. That's what I'd like to talk with you about for a few minutes today. Within an hour of news of her passing, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said President Trump's nominee to replace Justice Ginsburg will receive a vote in the Senate within an hour of her passing. The exact opposite of what he said when President Obama nominated Merrick Garland to replace Justice Scalia in 2016. At that time, Majority Leader McConnell made up a rule based on the fiction that I somehow believe there should be no nomination to the court in an election year. It's ridiculous. The only rule I've ever followed relating to the Supreme Court nomination was the Constitution's obligation for senators to provide their advice and their consent to a president's judicial nominee. But he created a new rule, the McConnell rule. Absolutely no hearing, no vote for a nominee in an election year, period, no caveats. And many Republican senators agreed with him, including then chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley of Iowa, including the current chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, who at the time said, and I'll quote verbatim, here's what he said, quote, "I want you to use my words against me if there's a Republican president in 2016 and a vacancy occurs in the last year of the first term. You can say, Lindsey Graham said, let's let the next president, whoever it might be, make the nomination." Continuing the quote, "And you could use my words against me and you'd be absolutely right." End of quote.
All right, folks, back to our Road Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment.
As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding for services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please, take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. Conservatives are pushing hard for them to confirm a justice before the election. Others are saying right during the lame duck session. Let's break it down. Kristen Clark, President, Executive Director, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Janice Mathis, she's Executive Director at National Council of Negro Women. Tricia Hofter, President, National Bar Association, and Barbara Arnwine is President, Founder, Transformative Justice Coalition. Kristen, I want to start with you, and that is when we look at this very issue, when we start trying to break this whole thing down. This is about to be a massive fight. Conservatives, they are looking to appoint a young justice. They want to have a 6-3 majority. Forget what they said in 2016. They have thrown those rules out. How do you see this?
We're on the brink of a constitutional crisis. We truly are. This is an unprecedented moment in our democracy. We actually have looked back at the history to the founding days of our nation, and never, not once, has there been a confirmation hearing that has taken place as voters were casting their ballots. Election day is not November 3rd. The election has already started. Tens of thousands of people have already gone out and voted during early voting, have cast absentee ballots. And for many of those voters, this is the issue that is number one, that is top of mind. Who are the senators who will provide advice and consent on a nomination? Who is the president who should put forth that nomination? So in a way, we're talking about disenfranchising Americans if we were to proceed with this nomination in an active election moment. And I think that AOC is exactly right, that this is a moment where we have to rise up in ways that we've never done before. We need to make the Supreme Court a front and center issue for us as Black people. And right now, every church, every fraternity, every sorority, every Black business, every healthcare professional should be reaching out to their senator, regardless of whether or not they are Republican or Democrat, and tell them that this nomination should not go forward until this election is concluded, until the voters have spoken, until the people have spoken. This is a life or death issue, whether you're talking about abortion, whether you're talking about voting rights, criminal justice, people on death row. This literally is a life or death issue for Black people.
Barbara, we've been dealing with this issue on this show, talking about the judges, talking about the federal bench. Look, It barely came up during the Democratic National Convention. And I think one of the things, Democrats have not been as focused on the courts as Republicans have been. But if you look at the history of African Americans, when you look at dating back to the Civil Rights Movement, look, that was achieved through the courts, which is why conservatives created these think tanks, the Fearless Society, because they knew if you control the courts, you control the laws.
Absolutely. And, Mr. McConnell, during this first Trump administration, has been able to put on the court over almost 200 conservative, unqualified judges. And I want to say to, Kristen makes a wonderful point. We need everybody to be active, but let's be very clear We don't want anyone nominated or confirmed until after the inauguration in January. After the inauguration in January, not after the election, after the inauguration, because what they're hoping to do is wait for a lame duck session of Congress, and during that lame duck session, they're going to try to, after the election, try to push through a confirmation. We want to make sure that Justice Ginsburg legacy that is upheld, that the new justice has the ability to walk in her shoes and to represent the many interests and the theoretical universal framework of equality that she so wonderfully embraced.
This though is all about power. This is about power, Tricia. Republicans have made this perfectly clear. Mitch McConnell hasn't cared about anything except confirming federal judges. They want to be able to control the judiciary for the next 30 to 40 years. I have been saying for the longest, trying to explain to people, they've been very purposeful. That is, they want to appoint judges 35 to 45 years old who they know who are going to serve 40 to 45 or 50 years. That's the strategy. They're clear. They're not hiding it.
Absolutely, Roland. Please feel free to call me CK Roland, but absolutely. They have been saying this forever. And I'm a trial lawyer. I'm president of the National Bar, but I'm also a trial lawyer. And I have seen front center the difference in the courts because I have a national practice. And it's unbelievable, if you are a trial lawyer, the difference in the courts that you see now versus 4 years ago. This is deliberate, this is intentional, and it's by design. So we must go to the polls and speak truth to power. We must not allow this quick process of confirming someone. And that's why at the National Bar Association, we've got over 66,000 Black lawyers and African-American lawyers, jurists, judges, law students in this country. So we've already mobilized 10% of them. That would be over 6,000 of them to be in our nonpartisan election protection effort because we've got to protect the right to vote. Justice Ginsburg was all about the right to vote, protecting women's rights, protecting the rights of the least of these. So as African Americans, as women of color, we must stand and fight for her last word, because that's the right thing to do. We don't need to rush through this process. We need to go through the orderly process to vet the candidates, to have our candidates as well. The National Bar Association and other bar associations, we always have candidates that we propose, that we look at. And even if they're candidates that are proposed, we need to vet them as well, because after all, this is the highest judicial appointment of the land. And we will shape this country if we take it lightly. As everyone has all said, all of these issues are at stake, whether it's human rights, civil rights, labor rights, reproductive rights, the right to live freely in this country. So we can't take it lightly, and we must make sure that we call our senators' offices over and over and over again until we make the point of letting them know that we feel that this appointment must wait until after a new president is installed in January, after January, and not a minute before. And we should respect the wishes of our heroine, our hero, who has meant so much to this country, so much to this country.
Janice, I've had people tell me, look, I don't care about the top of the ticket. I want to focus on local issues. And I keep trying to explain to them. I said, Florida's a perfect example. Amendment 4, grassroots initiative, took 10 years. They get it on the ballot. Folks work their butts off to get it. They get it passed. Republican legislature then passes a law saying you got to pay all your fines and penalties before you get your right to vote. They sue the state. It goes to federal court. The 11th Circuit they vote in favor of the Florida Republican legislature. And I keep trying to explain to people, this is what I'm trying to tell y'all. You can have federal judges who are impacting local issues. And so you can't act as if who's the president has no bearing on the local issues, because the president picks the judges. The Senate confirms the judges. And so who is control of the Senate and the White House can determine what local laws are passed in your particular city, county, or state.
You're absolutely right, Roland. It's great to be in the company of these wonderful lawyers who I've looked up to, CK and Barbara, and I know Reverend Jesse Jackson well. And we've heard him say many times, you know, you live but you live under the law. And there are no narrow Supreme Court decisions, and federal courts have awesome amount of power. But you know, it's almost like we're trying to be distracted. The solution to whether we honor Ruth Bader Ginsburg or whether we retake the Senate, both those paths go through the ballot box. If you care about voting rights, if you care about the environment and doing something about these fires on the West Coast, if you care about the Affordable Care Act, if you care about the right to organize, all of those rights and privileges of citizenship get regulated to one degree or another. Even education get regulated to one degree or another by a federal judicial system, because there are federal statutes to be interpreted and federal laws to be enforced. So I would just agree the path is through the ballot box. But you know, I want to challenge listeners who may be from my part of the United States down in the South. You've got Lindsey Graham and you've got Mitch McConnell. And at some point you must ask yourself, why are we so poorly represented? These men have awesome power in the federal legislature, but yet our states consistently lag in education and healthcare and infant mortality and maternal health care. Why are we always at the bottom? Are they too much focused on keeping artificial majorities that they can't represent the people that they're elected to serve? It is a conundrum, and people need to vote their interests. We're not electing friends or family members. We're electing a government and a set of policy choices. And that's what we've got to keep foremost in our minds, to my point of view.
Christian, the thing that jumps out, you talked about those issues, and again, a lot of folks who are on the left keep talking about Roe v. Wade. That is not the only issue we're talking about. The reality is the Supreme Court, as it stands, has had horrible rulings on voting rights. They went along with the voting purge, that lawsuit that came out of Ohio. They went along with to allow political gerrymandering that came out of Wisconsin. And they gutted the Voting Rights Act as well. Also, you put the Affordable Care Act is also in jeopardy as well, because the Trump administration wants to throw that out. So we're talking about voting, we're talking about health, we're talking about a multitude of issues, and also a Supreme Court. If you have a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court, they are very much pro-business. And so now you're talking about consumer rights as well.
You know, there's not a single issue that impacts our lives as Black people that is not touched by the Supreme Court, that is not somehow shaped by the rulings issued by the Supreme Court, by the precedent set by that court. And, you know, it's very remarkable. Over 200 judges installed by Trump in 3.5 years. Some of those nominees were unwilling to recognize Brown versus Board of Education as sacrosanct precedent that they would uphold. Some of those judges had clear records demonstrating hostility when it comes to civil rights and racial justice issues. We should expect more of the same if this president were to get an opportunity to fill that seat. We have to resist that with every ounce of our beings. I tell my 16-year-old son that if they succeed in filling this seat, they will be talking about that justice. He will be talking about that justice with his friends well into the time that he is 50 or 60 years old, because President Trump is being very intentional. The short list includes 3 women, one who's about 45 years old. We're talking about our life is literally on the line with this vacancy, and it's time that we rise up and urge these senators to do the right thing, the principled thing, and let the voters speak. Let the voters speak and determine how this vacancy gets filled.
CK, final comment from you. How are folks mobilized, or how should they be mobilizing? Should Democrats be looking at putting every single thing on the table? Yesterday, Speaker Nancy Pelosi would not comment on whether or not they would pursue a second impeachment. To me, this is not hey, we're thinking about, no, this is called, you're at DEFCON 5.
Right. We should go for broke. Let me just break it down that way. We should go for broke. We need to act as though our lives depend on this, because in reality, our lives do depend on this. If we think things are funky now or bad now with COVID and the response to COVID and all the other pandemics that we're facing in this country, election suppression, police brutality, how do we think these police brutality cases, if they go up to the Supreme Court, are going to be resolved? If we think things are bad now, we should wait and see what it's going to be like if we don't go for broke. We have to act like we are on our last breath and we're breathing. We need more air to survive, because if we don't, we may very well not survive. We think a lot of young people think, oh yeah, we have the right to vote. No, you don't have the right to vote. The Voting Rights Act has been diluted. We have to protect the right to vote. We have to fight for the right to vote. And the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, is going to have a say-so on everything that impacts our lives, especially the lives of Black folk, especially the lives of Black and brown people. So it's a wake-up call. It's a clarion call. We don't have the right to ignore it. So on all levels, Roland, we've got to pull out all the punches. Everyone, lawyers, non-lawyers, some lawyers, it's not about your profession. It's about getting out and doing what's right, getting out and making sure your voice is heard and speaking truth to power. And the only way you can do that in this country is going to the polls.
Barbara Arnwine and I have been saying that scene from Remember the Titans when the coach said, Herman, leave no doubt. There has to be a blowout. This can't be close. The Trump folks are going to contest everything. This is where if you're 18 to 29 and you're sitting there with the lowest vote numbers, this is where, understand, I'm being real clear. If you're 18, I expand, if you're 18 to 35 years old, let's make this real plain. America is going to be a minority country in 23 years. That means that if you're 18 years old, okay, in 23 years, you're going to be 41 years old. If he appoints one of these Supreme Court justices, and if she serves the same number of years as Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that means that this appointee will be on this court until 2060.
And that is what we cannot have happen. If you're listening to this show and you're watching this show, the first thing you ought to be saying right now is, not only am I going to vote, I'm going to make sure at least 10 other people I know vote. And we're going to vote judges. We're going to vote for judges. We're going to get rid of the senators who do not support good judges. Let's be very clear, everybody, that Trump can nominate, but it's the Senate that confirms. So what happens with the Senate in this election is the most critical of all of our votes. So people should be out there, South Carolina, Georgia, Kentucky. You got to really get your vote on for senator, because you have the power right now. Arizona, all of these states where there are, hotly contested races, Maine, you need to be voting. And I want to tell people that don't sit back and wait till the last minute to decide to vote. Vote early, right now, where you have that right. If you're going to do it by vote by mail, make sure you do it correctly. 6% of all Black ballots are being discarded in North Carolina because people need to follow those instructions. They need assistance. That's why we're going to have CK? We're going to have 3,000 to 5,000 Black lawyers out there helping with election protection, because we know that our vote is determinative. Remember that in April of this year, the most important decision that came down from this court was RNC versus DNC. And in that case, in April, even though she was very ill, Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote a searing dissent and said to the court, to the majority of the court, that you are denying people's voting rights. You're disenfranchising our voters, and that you got to do better. So we need that voice. We need that fight, because if they take away our voting rights, it's going to be an impossible world to live in here in the United States. We have to vote, people. Vote with everything you got. You know, put it all on the line. Not only do you vote, you get others to vote, and you go out there and you help others to vote. Everything you do, the churches, the civic organizations, the Greeks, everybody, we need you in this fight right now.
This is, look, at the end of the day, look, Janice, we have some of these ads. Anybody who is trying to sit here and trust anything that a Republican said in 2016 is a waste of time. Mitch McConnell, if you talk about Chuck Schumer, excuse me, Chuck Grassley. In fact, this just in, Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley indicates he won't oppose holding Supreme Court replacement hearings this year. This is the same person who said before they said it shouldn't happen until after a new election. Same thing. Now, Alaska, Lisa Murkowski is on record as saying such. But now, when you start breaking this thing down, it's real simple. If Mark Kelly is able to beat McSally in Arizona, then he'll be seated before November 30th. That means that takes the Republican majority from 53 to 52. If you go by what Murkowski and Susan Collins said, if they actually believe that the next person, the next president should pick that nominee, that now drops the Republicans from 52 to 50. That means Lamar Alexander, who's a lame duck, has already said he's going to go along with it. Now you have Grassley. That means that the one person left, the only person who could potentially stop this, Janice, is Mitt Romney. And so I know people want to put the focus on McConnell, but really, to me, the focus has to be on Collins, Murkowski, and Romney to not let this move forward.
Well, I know that it's not a good idea to disagree. I think you're absolutely right about where the focus should be. And the question is whether the voters in that state, his constituents, but I want to say this to those handful of senators who are facing difficult re-election battles, whether you intend to vote with the president or not. The president has demonstrated time and time and time again that he has no loyalty to anyone. Walk that plank with him on this issue of the Supreme Court, and you may lose your seat and the president won't even come to your aid or your rescue. I think that they have to bear in mind that all norms, all bets are off, all norms are destroyed. We are giving up on the idea of equal protection under the law in favor of some kind of oligarchies, giving up majority rule for minority rule. And so I would say to citizens everywhere, if you can vote, vote. Call your senators. Make sure they know that this is an important issue to you. To be honest with you, rich folk can get along without a Justice Department. But people of color, people who are marginalized, why do you think they're trying to suppress these votes? Disabling the post office, changing polling places, purging voters. That's because the vote has mattered. That is the last bastion for a white supremacist ideology to hide behind, because they are no longer Black people, brown people, women, gays. We are the majority in this country. You're talking about the majority in 2040. Right now, that generation, if you're under 25, you're part of a cohort that is already majority Black and brown. They know that. It makes them anxious. And so that's why you see this total reckless disregard for the way the country is supposed to operate. But the people have a voice. Yes. And my co-panelists have already said that voice is to vote, not just you, but everybody in the House, the Lodge, the union. Everybody needs to express themselves. And I'm talking to low to moderate income white folk too. You cannot, if he will let 200,000 people die while he knew that the virus was lethal, do not overestimate how much he cares about you and your family.
Well, this is the thing here. If you want to understand why federal judges matter, just a few moments ago, a federal judge ruled that has ordered Louis DeJoy to treat all election-related mail as first class and restore overtime for U.S. Postal Service employees. I keep telling people, that's right. Why federal judges matter. So don't act like, so for all those people who I called out, and I'm going to be real clear, who were full of shit in 2016, who said Trump and Hillary were the same, yeah, this is an example of what I was talking about, okay? because I said it then, the judges that Hillary Clinton would have appointed were not going to be the same judges Donald Trump would appoint. And so all these folks who were stuck on stupid, who got caught up in that whole deal, who are not understanding the long game. And this is the deal. The Republicans are about the long game. The demographic numbers are not lying. They know what is happening. They want to be able to control the courts for the next half century. They say we can lose the presidency, but if they install 300 federal judges, which represents a third of all federal judges, and they've got a 6-3 majority, and here's the deal, Clarence Thomas is 72, Alito is 70, Gorsuch is, Kavanaugh is 55, and Gorsuch is 53. Take the high end, just use Ruth Bader Ginsburg as a model. That means if Clarence Thomas and Alito serve until they're 87. Stephen Breyer, who's a liberal, he's 82. If they serve until 87, that means Clarence Thomas is there for another 13 years. That's 3 presidential elections. Alito was there for another 17 years. 4 presidential elections. That's why I keep telling people, stop playing games when it comes to voting. CK, Barbara, and Janice, I certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
All right, folks, back to our Road Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment.
As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding for services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please, take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. The folks at 538 broke down the polling data, and it talked about 18 to 29-year-old black voters and 60 plus. And it said here that trust congressional Republicans to do what is best for black people. Among blacks polled 18 to 29, 29% say they trust Republicans to do what's best for black people. 8% of 60-year-old or older black people, just 8%. Overall, the number was 21%. GOP is welcoming to black Americans. 18 to 29-year-old people, 28%. 60 plus, just 7%. Overall, 22%. Why am I reading that? Because I was just talking about Hans Van Spassky. This is a story from The Intercept on February 27th, 2019. Headline: Conservative expert privately warned GOP donors that a voting rights bill would help Democrats. In this, the bill was called the For the People Act. It would revamp lobbyist registration, campaign financing, and voting rights. The Brennan Center says, according to this lead, it will create a more responsive and representative government by making it easier for voters to cast a ballot and harder for lawmakers to gerrymander. Now, Heritage opposes the bill. They call it clearly unconstitutional. He also complained it comes at the expense of federalism. But here's what it says, Reese. Just 2 weeks later, however, as Spakovsky addressed a private gathering of conservatives, he was considerably more candid about his reason for opposing the bill. It would be bad for Republicans. Why did he come to that conclusion? Is right here. One measure in the bill that von Spakovsky singled out would guarantee people with felonies voting rights when they leave prison. The result would be an electoral advantage for Democrats, von Spakovsky said, citing a study that found that a number of close congressional elections in recent history would have tipped toward Democrats had the law been in place. Then this is what he said, quote, "The key race that stuck out to me, is that Mitch McConnell would have lost his first race for the U.S. Senate, which was a very close election. He won by 5,000 votes in 1984. So, Reese, when I see these black people say that Republicans will be good for black people in 28, 29%, I don't care if you're a black conservative. I don't care if you're a black Republican. But here's my whole piece. You can be a black conservative or black Republican, but don't use power to deny people the right to vote. And if those who are formerly incarcerated are more likely to want to get the right to vote, if looking at our numbers, they're likely going to be black. So the very black people in the 18 to 29 category who has feelings for the GOP, those same people are trying to screw you, black people. This is one of their experts saying it to GOP donors.
These numbers are just disgusting and disappointing, but I can't even say that I'm all that shocked, to be frank, because of the fact that there is a massive disinformation, misinformation campaign that's aimed towards that particular demographic. And another thing I think that Republicans have been very successful at is they understand this is not a matter of conversion when it comes to black voters, and in particular young black voters. But if they can successfully convince enough people that there is no difference between Republicans and Democrats, then some of the goodwill that comes from the things that the Democrats actually put forth, like for instance, the fact that people are getting got $1,200 in the CARES Act, that was something that the Democrats really pushed for in terms of that amount, or $600 a month unemployment and things of that nature. Then they get some of the goodwill from those things, but they don't take the blame for the white nationalist agenda that they are putting forth, and they're getting even more blatant about it. So it's disappointing, but it's deliberate, and a lot of people are so woke that they're asleep, okay? A lot of people are so woke that they're ingesting all of this propaganda, this anti-democratic propaganda, and they just, it just defies logic, it defies facts, and it defies reality. And so this is why I constantly talk about the disinformation and misinformation campaigns as part of the voter suppression campaign against black voters. It's not just what they're doing at the ballot box. It's not just what they're doing in terms of purging and in terms of the laws. It's what they do in terms of manipulation and convincing black voters that there is no difference between the white nationalist party and the Democratic Party, which does have its issues. I'm not saying that the Democratic Party is perfect, but they are miles apart in terms of what they propose. 400 bills that have passed the House that are collecting dust on Mitch McConnell's desk shows the complete difference between a Democratic ran country and a Republican Trump white nationalist ran country. But people are just not paying attention, and where they're getting their information from, which is all curated by Twitter algorithms and social media algorithms, are telling them a story that's not accurate.
And this is why right here, when I look at these folks here, Erica, and I got to call people out, like I got some dumbass on my YouTube channel. He goes, well, Joe Biden's 1994 crime bill information is true. Okay, so here's the question. what have Democrats done? So this is just real simple, okay? So for all the people out there who focus on the 94 crime bill, and Joe Biden should be criticized as the author of that crime bill. But here's what I want to know. What the hell has happened since?
Right.
That's what I want to know. I want to know what the hell has happened since. 1994 is 2020. What I want to know, what has Joe Biden and Democrats done between 1994 and 2020? Because the story I just read for you was from 2019. The A. Philip Randolph story I just read for y'all from ProPublica was yesterday. So while a bunch of y'all, and I'm going to say it, want to remain stuck on stupid and talking about, well, Joe Biden, he praised Eastland in 75. Wrong as hell. I'm going to call them out. But y'all do realize that there are Senator Eastlands in 2020.
That part. Hello.
Y'all do realize.
In the White House, Stephen Miller.
Y'all do realize.
Right.
And again, this is for all y'all just stuck on stupid folk who listen to ignorant people who call women bed wenches, who are telling you fools not to vote, and they all hollering tangibles. And what we gonna get, let me remind you, there are Eastlands today. Eastland was a Dixiecrat. The Eastlands today are Republicans.
That's right.
Erica, the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, hardcore Republican, made changes to early voting because of COVID. Republicans in Texas are suing him. They ain't just suing Democrats. They are suing a fellow hardcore Republican because they deal is, oh, hell no, we do not want them voting by mail. We don't want them having any extra early voting days because, and I'm going to say it before I go to you, Erica, and then when I go to a break and come back and talk to Philando Castile's mama. For all you simpleton SOBs, for all of you simple Simons, for all of you folk who are stuck on stupid, and I know Cleo Monaga was here, he was rolling, don't call them names, but if your dumb ass is advocating not voting, that's exactly what they want you to do. Because Erica, Donald Trump stood before the microphones and said, thank you, black people, for not voting. Y'all helped me. Go ahead.
With his damn foot on everybody's neck. Listen, in 2020, the son of a Klansman, I've been saying that for over 2 years, not because it's a cool comedic punch, because it's the damn truth. And what the Klan has done and continues to do and have a past of doing is anti-blackness, hatred, and always marginalizing people of color. When we think about where we are right now, when we think about this Bond man who runs the election law reform initiative over in the Heritage Foundation and keeps up with the database that's supposed to be monitoring supposed voter fraud since 1992, there were less than 1,300 cases. And guess what? Of those 1,300 cases, you have people, particularly back in 2018, Republican operatives that in 2018 in North Carolina are actually in jail now because they actually participated in voter fraud for the 9th Congressional District there in North Carolina. You have a Donald Trump in 2020 that said in North Carolina in September to make sure that you not only vote by mail, but make sure you follow up at that vote and you vote at the poll on election day. This is the person that has their damn foot on your neck. If the vote were not powerful, you would not have Republicans meeting in secret. You would not have the son of a Klansman in the White House telling everybody on national TV at 6 o'clock in the damn evening that he'll think about conceding the election. He's already saying that mail-in ballots, which we know that because we're in a pandemic, and you just mentioned, in Texas, I think there were over 50,000 new cases of COVID in the past 14 days in the state of Texas alone. So you have a governor there, you have a fight that's happening there. You're talking about people being able to vote safely, and here this foolish, evil clown is saying on television that, there's not really anything to be trusted around mail-in ballots. This is the present threat. This is not only a domestic terrorist, but this is a person who has allowed foreign entities into this country and sitting in the White House and to interfere with the disinformation campaign that Reese continues to talk about so that the vote will be suppressed. This is the person that we have to get out. Him is his regime in November. There's really nothing to talk about other than that for the next 39 days. And if anybody is sitting out the election, they're actually saying that their life is of no value either.
And I'm real clear. I don't need you to love Democrats. I don't need you to love Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I don't need you to like them. But I damn sure need you to know who hates you. Let me repeat that for somebody who didn't quite get it. I don't need you to love Democrats. I don't need you to love or like Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. But I do need you to know who hates you and who wants to take away health care, who wants to take away the Affordable Care Act, who wants to cut Social Security, who's already done it, done away with police consent decrees. I want you to understand who is actually attacking us, who is actually using opportunity zones to gentrify our neighborhoods and got you thinking they investing in our neighborhoods, but then your mama and your grandmother and your aunt and your cousins can no longer afford to live in the very same neighborhoods. But if some of y'all want to sit here and I ain't voting, I don't care, if they all the same, okay, go right ahead. But you know what? Shut the hell up, because I don't want to hear nothing out of your mouth over the next 4 years. Because if you don't do nothing when it comes to the school board, don't say a damn thing about education. If you don't say nothing about the city council and you don't vote, don't say nothing about city services. If you want to complain about the county government but you don't vote, shut the hell up. If you want to complain about what your state should or should be doing but you didn't vote, shut the hell up. Because you can't complain about something where you had no impact in changing when you had the opportunity to do so.
All right, folks, back to our roadblock unfiltered video in just one moment.
As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding of services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov.